I had such a respectful audience who actually went quiet before I started. But having said that, I think people normally start speaking amongst themselves when I do start. So welcome to Automotive Logistics, the Supply Chain Conference for 2017. My name's Louis Yakumi. I'm the publisher of the Automotive Logistics Group, who are publishers of Automotive Logistics and Finished Vehicle Logistics magazines, and organisers of the Automotive Logistics Global series of conferences that are held in Mexico, Europe, China, UK, Brazil, Russia, India, and of course in the United States. And I'm delighted to be back in Atlanta, a beautiful city. Maybe not beautiful might not quite be the word, but it's a great city. It's only 1 year since our last Atlanta conference, 12 months, so what could possibly happen in just a year that could make a difference to the automotive and logistics industries? Well, there's the small matter of the US election. In fact, a few elections, the US election, the UK, Brexit, and now the French election. So I don't think we're really sure what the implications are for the automotive industry, but NAFTA, infrastructure investment, changes in regulations for the automotive industry, some things that will certainly have an impact on us. But what does seem to have changed is the future of the automotive supply chain and logistics industry. We all know and we've all heard how much the automotive industry is going to change, mobility, autonomous cars, EVs and so on, how much it's going to change in the next 10 years. And it's not just the automotive industry that's changing, it's almost every industry, manufacturing, retail, service industries. And a lot of these changes have been led by what is loosely termed as Silicon Valley. The tech industry, social media, the sharing economy, Amazon, Uber, Tesla. So I'm very excited that over the next 2 days we'll be looking at automotive supply chains and logistics through Silicon Valley eyes. What do you guys have to do differently? Excuse me. I had a conversation with a top supply chain executive for a car maker recently, who had to make a presentation to his CEO about his supply chain organization. And he can't just say, I'm improving what we do, we're tweaking a little bit, we're cutting costs. The CEO expects to see change, imagination, innovation, ideas to match the changes the automotive industry is going through. So that's what we're going to be discussing over the next 2 days. You'll hear from car makers, parts suppliers, logistics service providers, and also from outsiders to the industry to hear what can be done to make sure that automotive logistics in the future is ready to support the automotive industry of the future. And every year the conferences have an unofficial theme. Last year it was the year of the fun conferences, and I hope you enjoyed the conferences last year and had maybe a little bit of fun. For 2017, the theme is bringing people together. That sounds obvious. I guess that should be the basis for every conference. But this year, there's many reasons for every conference where we have that theme, and it seems to have more relevance. For some conferences, it's collaboration. For some conferences, it's linking the industry with the government. For here, it's about working together to make sure the whole industry changes and moves towards the change that the industry needs. The next steps are not going to be made by one company or one department. It's going to be by the whole industry changing together, working together, collaborating, changing mindsets, bringing new people into the industry. I've never had so many requests from different parts of the industry to encourage more meetings between car makers and car makers and part suppliers and part suppliers, and of course all of the above with logistics service providers. And I've been trying to work out what the industry needs, why they need these kind of meetings. And I recently asked some car makers what they want from their LSPs in the future. Overwhelmingly, the answer was for them to be smarter and innovative. And that's why we put this conference together in Atlanta. Smarter and innovative. I mean, if there's one person who really sums it up, that's probably me. Thank you for your support, everybody. I even had my special innovative haircut for today. You probably could all notice the difference. But what I believe we brought together in Atlanta is car makers, part suppliers, LSPs of all types, and individuals who consider themselves to be and are forward-thinking and proactive. Amongst these forward-looking companies are our sponsors, our premier sponsor, Ryder, who have supported us from our very first conference back in the year 2000 as our premier sponsors and great partners. So thank you very much to Ryder, and they'll be hosting our dinner this evening. Our very first innovation sponsors, Sergere, with whom we've developed this new sponsorship level to highlight not just what they are doing as an innovative company, but more importantly, what they are doing to encourage innovation in the automotive industry in all sectors. Our global sponsors, Changju Logistics CDC and CHEP, so called because they sponsor all of our conferences around the world. Our gold sponsors, Evolution Time Critical. Welcome to the US, guys. They're opening their first office over here, a company that we've known very well based in the UK. And I'm delighted that after working with us for many years, they're now opening their first office in the UK. So congratulations to Evolution Time Critical. And ProTrans, another gold sponsor who are in growth mode at the moment with making some major acquisitions to support their automotive client base. And our silver sponsors, CNW, Syncreon, and Venture Global Solutions. They all have products, knowledge, and people to support the industry in its next phase. So visit their stands, read their literature, meet their people. I'm sure they'll have something that can help you, make you think about what you can do to help your company. Automotive Logistics Supply Chain is also part of the Automotive Logistics Live program. This means that the conference is being streamed live across the world, but you can also use the app to ask questions and make comments to the whole audience. You can even send direct messages to other attendees. You'll find the instructions on how to do that on the screen. There's Wi-Fi, which is hosted by ProTrans as well, and you'll see more instructions on the printed program, how you can join the live app. You please log on to use it. It's a good way of interacting with us. We can see any comments or questions that you make as moderators. So if there's any questions that you're too shy to ask, please ask them on through the app. And there's no excuse not to be on social media nowadays. Let's face it, if you really want to know what's happening in America and with NAFTA, you probably will hear it first on Twitter anyway. We'll also use it for some voting surveys, which we'll be doing later in the conference. So please do log on and use it to enjoy the whole experience of being at Automotive Logistics. But most importantly is what you do in the room. Our conferences are not lectures. They're interactive with questions and opinions in the sessions too. Last year we had good interaction from the audience, and I see no reason why this shouldn't be the case here as well. A couple of new things we're doing this year as well is you'll see the red and green cards on the table, and just if you do pick them up, they're not red cards and green cards, they're the same card. But if you turn it round, I have to be very specific with the logistics group. So that we'll just be doing snap polls throughout the conference, just quick, simple yes or no, good or bad kind of thing. So maybe we can start it off now. So if you can take the red and green cards, maybe a kind of a simple question would be, do you think the automotive logistics industry is currently innovative enough and moving forward in the right way? If you agree, hold up the green card. If you think that we've got a long way to go, then hold up the red card. So it's a reasonable mixture, but it is very much on the red side. That's definitely the majority. So that's why we're having the conference today, is to try and improve that. The change, there's only so much we can do here, but it's about changing the mindset. At a recent conference, we were talking about technology, and I made the point that technology is not the solution. Technology is a tool. So it's up to us up to you guys, up to you and your team, up to the automotive logistics experts coming through and already in our industry, to adapt and listen and change our mindsets to be open to these new ideas, whether it's technology, whether it's just new ideas. Some of the things that we're doing, for example, you might have seen, I don't know if they're in your delegate bags, there's a leaflet here from Venture, one of our sponsors. They're doing a prize draw. So please complete the form. It's a very simple form, and we'll collect them or hand them in because they'll be doing a prize draw at the end of the second session. They're good prizes, but it's also going to be fun because they're going to be using a drone to help with the process of the prize draw. So that's the flying drone, not the kind of droning that I do when I'm doing the opening presentations. And the stands in general, visit the stands because they're doing some different things. I think Ryder, for example, have got VR, virtual reality glasses on their stand. So visit the stands and not only will you get some useful information, but hopefully you'll meet some good people, collect some good gifts as well, which is always useful. The next 2 days, we've got, the first session now is a great opener to discuss what people need to do to think and be more innovative. The second session, we give a few more examples of how it's being used, what's being done practically. The third session is our famous automotive logistics think tanks. We've called them automotive logistics innovation think tanks, again, to keep that spirit, the spirit of thinking forward and trying to think differently and more innovatively. So there's some great think tanks after lunch this afternoon. And a session just before the dinner on pretty well Industry 4.0, what manufacturing is going to look like in the future. Then we've got a great dinner tonight at the Atlanta Museum, which was hosted by Ryder, so we hope we'll see you there. Then tomorrow, another great full day with some sessions, perhaps even a little bit more practical, specific sessions on supply chains, service parts, and then, and how to think differently, which finishes off with a great final session. We've got some of the VIPs and some disruptors up there to just just a final Q&A. It's a great end to the conference and a chance for you to ask some comments, ask some questions or make some comments after I hope, a great 2 days. So the objective is hopefully you'll learn a little bit. I'm sure you'll meet some great people. And I hope and think at the end of the 2 days you'll go back with your minds a little bit more open and ready to be part of the change that's definitely going to happen in the automotive supply chain and logistics industries. So for the first session, we've got 3 great speakers. One from GAMA, from the Georgia Automotive Manufacturers Association, to kind of welcome us. Then we've got a couple of industry experts in, Ernst & Young. Everyone knows them as a kind of, I suppose traditionally as an auditing company, but they've done some great work and research on automotive and supply chains. And then, of course, from Ryder, a very senior executive from Ryder, to talk about what they're doing. Not so much about what they're doing, but how the industry is changing and an example of what Ryder, a top logistics service provider, are doing to change and be ready for the future of the industry. So without any more ado, I think I've talked enough to start off. So I hope you enjoy the first day, and I'd like to welcome to the podium now with the first presentation of Automotive Logistics Supply Chain 2017, Rick Walker from GAMA. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everyone. Or should I say good morning, y'all, because you are in Atlanta. You'll probably tell from my accent, and I believe I have one, that I'm from Detroit. I'm not originally from Atlanta. I do want to welcome you here, and that is my job. So welcome. And I sort of wanted to set the stage as to where are you now? I think you know you're in Atlanta, but let me tell you a little bit more. If you look at the map that we've put up there, the southeastern portion of the United States has blossomed into one of the hotbeds of the automotive industry in the world. What I've listed and shown there are the OEMs, the major OEMs who have plants. And I'd be happy to share this data with you, all these slides and things, if they're helpful to you. But a lot of this has happened just in the last 20 years. A lot of it has happened in just the last 10 years. So there's a lot happening. So why am I here? I'm the founder, president, and CEO of GAMA, which is the Georgia Automotive Manufacturers Association. And we're relatively young. We were formed about 6 years ago as the power curve started to go up. So what is GAMA? Well, we're not radioactive. We're not a rock band, and believe it or not, there was a rock band called GAMA. We are what I call a phenomenon of several AMAs in the Southeast. And I'll help you here, there's one in Tennessee called TAMA. There's one in Mississippi called MAMA. There's one in Alabama called AMA. No, the one in South Carolina is not called SCAMA. They decided to go with SCAC instead. So who cares? I think you should, because there's a lot going on here, and particularly here in Georgia with our university system and a lot of high-tech companies. We've got a lot going on that can help the logistics and distribution industry. GAMA has hit the power curve. We've grown from about 0 to 500 members in 6 years. Because of our phenomenal growth, we've even caught the attention of the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank. I was asked to speak to a meeting there about 2 years ago. Part of it is we're blessed by being part of the state of Georgia and all the efforts that they're making. And I'm not going to bore you with a lot of statistics, but some of these I think are fairly impressive. The export dollars, the number of facilities, and the number of facilities there are the people that are actually OEMs, tier 1s, tier 2s. But there are a lot of tier 3s and tier 4s that are making brackets for instrument panels. So it's a fairly large industry that's been here for a long time. 2016 was a record year for the state of Georgia. The Quick Start program, sponsored by the state of Georgia, has got world renown. A lot of you probably flew in through the Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. That is ranked one of the busiest in the world. The Georgia seaports, depending how you slice and dice your numbers, I believe they're the 4th busiest. I had a conversation with someone about that last night. Depends how you slice and dice the numbers. Port of Savannah, extremely busy. Port of Brunswick does a lot of automotive work and kitting. Georgia's rail system, I'm told, is one of the best in the country. Georgia's roads are such that you can get to 80% of the United States starting out in Georgia within 2 days. And I'm not going to touch the next one because I think that you know a lot more about logistics, distribution, and warehousing than I do, or ever will. So bottom line, the Southeastern automotive industry, I think, is running on all cylinders, and I think it's a great place to be, and I welcome you for coming. Couple of things that I'm just going to skim over quickly. If you want to continue your interest in learning, the Southern Automotive Industry, these are the AMAs. We have a joint event in October. It'll be in Birmingham, and it's called the Southern Automotive Conference. And contact me if you want further information about that. The website is live, and I'll help you get involved. The good news for GAMA is that GAMA will be hosting that event, the Southern Automotive Conference, in 2018 here in Atlanta. So please save those dates. I'd love to see every one of you there, and I'd love to just have the opportunity to speak to you about whether or not you want to make a decision about coming. I will try to make it worth your while. In fact, if we have to sort of mold the program a little bit to be a little bit more logistics and distribution focused or technology focused, we will. So I believe we're sitting in the land of limitless opportunities here in Georgia, and we're glad you're here. So if I can do anything further for you, please let me know. I'm the GAMA guy. I'm Rick Walker, R-Walker at gamma-georgia.com, and I look forward to hearing from all of you and mingling with you after the presentations. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rick, and thank you for welcoming us to Georgia. Next up, a presentation looking a bit forward about how to think differently, how and why to be innovative, and a little bit of some information of how the industry is going to be looking as well. So I'd like to welcome to the podium Sven Dharmani, the Principal of Advisory Services for Ernst & Young. Thank you, Sven.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Louis. So what I want to talk a little bit about is what's driving change in our industry and what is it going to look like in the next 5, 10, 15 years. And when we look at the key factors driving change, this is the framework we use. One is autonomous vehicles. Second is electrification. Third is the concept of mobility itself, not just transportation, but mobility. And finally, the connected car or the connected vehicle of the future. So that's really the 4 key drivers that are transforming what our future is going to look like. So I'm going to dive a little bit into each one of them and then come back over into where we think we're going in terms of the next 5 to 10 years in terms of sales globally. So looking at first the autonomous vehicle, the success is really going to depend upon how seamless is the interaction between the driver and the vehicle. Autonomous is going to have a huge impact on our economy, our cities, our own personal day-to-day life. I mean, let's just talk about cities. If you think of our glorious city of Washington, D.C., they get about $92 million of revenue from parking tickets and another $37 million from speeding and red light violations. With autonomous vehicles, a lot of that is going to change. So currently, I think the number is U.S. has about 144 billion square feet of parking space in major cities. If you cut back 40% because your autonomous vehicle can drop you off and then go back and park somewhere else or go back home or take your wife and your kids to the soccer practice, well, you can cut back 40% of the parking spaces needed in the cities, which is 60 billion square feet. So just to put it in perspective, that's Connecticut and Vermont put together. That's the amount of real estate that can get freed up, which is tremendous. So there's a huge impact to real estate as well of autonomous vehicles. Another interesting fact was, think about in the longer term, the change to hotel and food industry, food delivery. Autonomous vehicle can actually deliver the food. Or once we get to the point where the vehicle can become more comfortable, you can have a long overnight trip in the car. So you don't really need to spend a whole night in a hotel. Just drive there, do your meetings, and come back. There's going to be a long-term ramification for the hotel industry as well. Another interesting one is, what does this do to insurance and, more close to my heart, automotive supply chain? With autonomous vehicles, the impact to crash parts or repair parts is going to be significant because they're going to be prevented. Because 90% of the collisions are a result of human error. So that has a ramification on your service parts demand, especially crash parts. So it's going to have an impact on us in the long term. And there are different levels of autonomy, level 1 to level 5. So we may not get to level 5 right away, but level 1, 2, and 3 are coming here faster than we know it. In fact, a lot of cities have done experiments. Even trucks have autonomous capabilities now. I'm looking at a new car which has automatic lane control, so it'll keep me in the lane. So it's pretty fascinating how this is going to drive change to our logistics. Everybody here is familiar with driver shortage. What impact does this have on relieving some of the pressure on driver shortage for logistics? So definitely a key driver and ramping up very, very rapidly, faster than we realize. The second one is, I'll say electrification. And there are lots of technologies out there. There's fuel cell, hydrogen, electric. We believe electric is the predominant emerging technology that's going to have sort of the lion's share in the future. A couple of things that are holding it back, which is the energy density on the battery pack, as well as the infrastructure, charging infrastructure. And that's changing. So what you'll see is 50% reduction of the cost by 2025 in terms of the cost of the energy and the availability of the components, and then 50% annual growth of global charging capability available in public. For example, Electrify America is one example of that, where VW is investing billions in the US to set up an electric charging infrastructure. So it's going to have a huge impact. However, this is not as near term, this is a longer term. And the reason is, if you look at a lot of you are from OEMs, if you look at your powertrain cycles, they're pretty long. So right now, you have powertrains planned for the next 10 years. So in order to have viable technology, including batteries and motors, available in a cost-efficient fashion now, to be able to plan, your production will be in 2017 or 2030, right? So this is a longer-term play, but what we see is, by 2025, 2030, still the internal combustion engines are still going to drive efficiency through combination of factors. But post 2030 is when electrification is really going to take off, and it's going to start to take a very, very significant share of powertrain. And this has a huge impact on our business as well, and logistics as well. I mean, engine and transmission consist of 1,500 parts, roughly. When you shift to an electric powertrain, it's got 35 parts in a motor and a battery pack. So the logistics changes completely of how you put together the powertrain of the car and where the powertrain comes from. Batteries are pretty heavy. You don't want to really ship them overseas. So that's going to drive change in our industry, and it's a longer-term play, not as close-term as autonomous vehicles. The next area is really the concept of mobility. And I'll use my personal example. Even 2 years ago, I'm typically in 3 to 5 cities a week. First thing I would do as I'd get off the plane is go to Avis or National Rent a Car, have a car. 50% of the time now, I just Uber or Lyft. I don't even bother to make a reservation because I know I can get there to my destination much more efficiently, and I can actually use my time more productively. In addition to that, if I look at the cost with parking and everything else, it's really not that different. So there is no cost advantage, but it's more convenient. And as the generations forward start to look at the concept of mobility, because their incomes are much more stressed due to higher cost of urban housing and their loans and other factors, mobility is going to drive shift of the ownership. So a lot of cities are doing experiments. A lot of OEMs are doing experiments. Toyota, GM, Ford, they all have huge investments. GM in Lyft, Toyota in Uber. Ford has its own smart mobility division. There are other experiments out there where OEM is saying to corporates, let me provide you the last mile because your employees can get to the train station, but from the train station to your campus is the inconvenient part. How about I pick your crew up or your team up from the train station and then drop them to your different points in your campus? So there are lots of experiments going on around the world. In New York cities and cities around the world, the apartments are coming with like 15 or 20 days of car use. If you want more, you can get it, but it's included. So I don't really need to own a car. I don't have to have insurance. I don't have to pay for parking. I don't have to deal with maintenance. So that is definitely changing the way our industry is going to use cars. Will the dealers be dealers tomorrow, or maybe they'll be owners and maintainers of mobility transport fleet, and that changes how we do things as well. Finally, one of the important ones to me, and the one which has a huge impact on logistics, is also connectivity, connected cars or connected vehicles. And believe it or not, this is already in play. Arguably, GM OnStar was the pioneer in having the connectivity into the vehicle. They've had it for a long time, over a decade and a half. But there are three elements, right? One is the enhancing the driver experience. So providing traffic updates, location, fuel, especially as you start to become electric, where is the next charging point along my journey, and vehicle-to-vehicle interaction. This is going to be critical because now the cars can talk to each other. Actually, Japan is setting up an infrastructure, but if cars can talk to each other, you can prevent collisions, you can minimize traffic jams, and travel much more effectively. So that's a key factor in terms of what does a connected car or a connected vehicle bring to us. The second one is customer service, right? Customer experience. So if I have a car and then over the weekend I'm going to drive through the tail of the dragon in the Carolinas, well, how about I download a sport package for the weekend and get a 50 extra horsepower and a performance pack? But I don't need it every day because I drive in the city. But I just want it for the weekend. Well, I can download that pack for the weekend, enjoy the extra 50 horsepower and performance, and then after the weekend it's done, right? A lot of the cars already have Pandora and other things, but imagine the possibilities of connectivity. I think some of this is already happening, right? If you look at the OTA updates through Tesla, service reminders, being able to diagnose if my check engine light is actually a gas cap which was left open or my engine is about to blow up. What's the difference? I can't tell right now because I just see a check engine light, but being able to diagnose that and schedule a service, making sure there is a part available, how cool is that? And that's already starting to happen. And the third element is really around improving the vehicle operations. And a lot of this is starting to play. And there are many elements that are required to have good, robust end-to-end connectivity. So I've listed them all. I'm not going to drive through them, but it's the communication between the OEM, the vehicle, the customer, the city. I think the fight's going to be on who owns the data. But this has a huge impact on our industry specifically in terms of logistics is, how much can you optimize logistics using the connectivity and the data? And a lot of the cabs already have that. So these are the key drivers that are changing our industry. And what's happening is the barrier for entry for new, I'll say, players in the market is changed. If I look back even 15 years ago, it would be very hard for a new player to enter the market. Now, it's not the same anymore. Faraday, Tesla, they've all changed the paradigm. Tesla's valuations are higher than Ford now, and their production is a fraction. So the barriers to entry have gone down. Connected cars, autonomous vehicles, and mobility itself are going to drive more change in the next 5 years than we've seen in the past 20 years. Electrification for sure will, but I think we'll see a penetration after about 15 years from now. And I think the important thing over here is how do we provide service and a great experience to the customer. I think that's where we're going to create the value here. So with that, let me pivot over to where we are and what we're going to see in the market. If we look at some of the changes over the last few years, brick used to be the engine of growth. Brick's kind of broken apart a little bit now. Russia and Brazil have stagnated and declined. India and China are still growing. So you're seeing different plays in different geographies. So we're going to continue to see that. So far globally, we've had about 4% growth in FY17, and roughly 45% increase from where we were 10 years ago in 2007. So it's a significant growth. But going forward, we think India is going to continue to drive growth. Western Europe is growing China is going to grow at a moderate pace. US is going to stay pretty flat. We feel Japan's going to drop a little bit, and Brazil is going to stay flat or down. So that's what we feel in terms of where the market's going in the next 5 years. And more specifically, if we start to look at the quantitative numbers, the big players in the market are China in terms of the volume and US. And that growth is for US is pretty flat. For China is going to be moderate. And that's going to bring the global growth in the next 5 years to 2 to 3%. That's our forecast. So that's what the market looks like. But what's happening inside this is what's critical, which is the changes due to autonomous vehicles, due to the connectivity in the car, due to the usage and the ownership being different with the concept of mobility. I think that's really what's important. And that's what's going to shape, not just the next 5 years, but the next 10 years as well. So, we can either, go along for the ride, or we can keep our hands on the wheel and we can blaze the trail. And as my good friend Bill Wappler reminded me this morning that 10 years from now, there won't be a wheel to keep your hands on potentially. So let me just put in the destination where I want to go, because we want to control that. We want to manage where we're going rather than just going along for the ride. So I think it's going to be an exciting journey. I think it's going to be a really phenomenal journey over the next 5 to 10 years, and I'm really looking forward to it. So thank you.
Thank you, Sven. That's great. Thank you very much, Sven. Very interesting presentation there. And it looks like we've got a fascinating future coming ahead. It will have a big impact on the supply chain and logistics, but it's also so uncertain. We're not sure what the impact will be. And of course, the classic question that I remember being asked a question, I think maybe at our global conference in Detroit, by a young student, probably an 18, 19-year-old student, asking me, what do I think the next Uber will be? And I said, what are you asking me for? It's these 18, 17-year-old kids working in their garages or whatever they do that's probably going to come up with the next disruptor. And we've got no idea what it's going to be. We're trying to predict what's going to happen by 2025 or 2030. Well, I think one thing I would quite confidently predict is something amazing is going to happen from a technology point of view. We've got no idea what it is. We probably can't even guess what it is. But it's going to have a huge impact on automotive industry. So we're trying to plan, but plan for what is very tough. But we're now going to have a presentation to look at how technology, all these changes, how technology is going to impact on supply chains. So I'd like to welcome to the podium Scott Perry, the Chief Technology and Procurement Officer from Ryder. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Thanks to the Automotive Logistics team for the opportunity to spend a few minutes giving a little bit of insight of some of the things that we've been working on. I am Scott Perry. I'm the Chief Technology and Procurement Officer for Ryder, and I'll go ahead and explain the title because it is by no means a traditional Chief Technology Officer role. I have the best job in the company. I probably have the best job in the industry. Because not only do I wear the hat of Chief Procurement Officer and working with all of our top suppliers who are providing products that we use for solutions for our customers and future products and services as well within our network, but also working with a lot of the emerging technology providers as well and trying to understand what relationships can be built and how those can be utilized to develop new products. So our CIO will be on a panel later today. He is absolutely on top of everything as it applies to infrastructure and data management and laptops and all that fun stuff. I get to focus on all the other fun things as it relates to our external business. So with that being the case, I wanted to give a little bit of insight around some of the things we're working on and more frankly, what's occurring in the broader industry as it relates to transportation and logistics and frankly, some of the factors that are converging for it to really build into almost the perfect storm. So, when the title of this session, through Silicon Valley eyes, I chuckled a little bit, because if you think about how Silicon Valley thinks of our industry, they see it as a veritable playground. They are looking at it as a smorgasbord of opportunity, of looking at disruption and how they can deploy new technologies, and there's no real consideration for the understandings of how business is conducted and how relationships exist. The focus is on how they can accelerate efficiency and innovation and eliminate inefficiency, and do so by connecting as many partners within the industry as possible. So that's all good from an efficiency standpoint. But when we think about the networks that have been established over the past 20, 30, 40 years, the technologies we've deployed in the past 10, 20, 30 years, those are going to be challenged very, very soon, if not already. So what I have attempted to do is really characterize this in 5 different areas. Number one, just the pace of technology change. The regulatory landscape, because there is a lot that's going on within our industry that's converging and is creating opportunities and challenges for us all. The changing distribution networks, the energy revolution, and then finally the truck of the future, if you'll allow. So with regard to technology acceleration, seldom do we go back 600 years to depict, how things are evolving, but this was a unique graphical depiction of just exactly how much technology evolution has been occurring. And Sven made the point a few minutes ago that what we will see in the next 5 years is probably going to outpace the changes that we've seen in the past 20. And I would agree with that. We are seeing so many changes in so many areas, and it's evolving very, very quickly. And every day there's a new development or a new announcement or a new entrant into the marketplace who's looking to disrupt, and they're finding ways to disrupt. Connectivity is key. One of the elements of my job is I lead our connected vehicle strategy team and telematics and understanding how that can be deployed. And I'll talk about that a little more fully. But most of the connected devices that are represented in this graph, and by the way, this is showing that by 2020, there'll be 34 billion connected devices around the globe. Now, there's only about 7.5 billion people on the planet right now. So across the entire globe, 5 connected devices per person. Now, there are countries where there's no electricity, there's no running water, but they have connectivity. So if you think about that and that ability to reach out into new markets and the ability to connect people, and it's really driven by this voluntary pull-through of connected devices. This hasn't been driven by regulation, I'll speak to that in a moment, but all of this growth generally has been driven by voluntary acceptance of us using this technology in our lives. And it's moved beyond, the office and business to where, as I look around the room, if I ask for a show of hands, I'll see a lot of Apple Watches. I see everyone with smartphones, tablets, other connected devices, and we are addicted to them. We're addicted to the convenience of these, but it's creating a tremendous amount of data and connectivity, and creates a lot of opportunity to understand user habits, buying habits, movement. I also have theories around, there are also wearable technologies, rings. The latest is a ring that can track biometrics and track positioning. And as I think about the transportation industry and think about the regulatory environment, I see a day coming where we may have our drivers who are operating commercial vehicles who are wearing a ring. And just because their logbook says that they have had 3 days of rest, and they should be capable of 5 days of work and 10 hours of driving, if they partied a little too hard over the weekend and that ring says they didn't rest very well last night, they may only be available for 5 or 6 hours of driving before they have to take a mandatory break. So that's where the technology has the capability of moving. Now, that's really out there on the periphery, but it is a potential that could be utilized to drive efficiency, drive safety, and it's something that we all need to be very, very aware of. So all of that is also leading to connected infrastructure, connected vehicles, connected cities. And that connectivity is really, from a supply chain standpoint, from a transportation logistics standpoint, is now creating this network of connectivity that's never existed before. When you think about customers, end customers, midstream customers, connected to our drivers, connected to our vehicles, having access to that information and visibility from an infrastructure perspective, understanding if you're telling them your delivery is going to arrive in 20 minutes and they see the vehicle's an hour away, credibility is going to be challenged. And that's probably the number one takeaway, is that visibility is going to create a significant amount of transparency. And with that transparency comes a significant degree of accountability. So the way in which we share information and interact with each other is going to change very, very dramatically. That's also going to hold true from a compliance standpoint. When you think about the regulatory authorities and the reference that was made a moment ago to the use of autonomous vehicles, the same holds true here with just the connectivity before we even get to autonomy with regard to how assets are being utilized and driver behavior and how those vehicles, simply weigh scales that'll be integrated into the vehicle. So you'll know if the vehicle's overloaded, and the vehicle will not operate until it's legally loaded and weighs out at a safe level. So there are definitely safeguards that will be put in place as we think about those assets of the future, and the future is very, very, very near. So from a regulatory perspective, this is facing us now. This is the GHG Phase 2 emissions. So those of you with fleets and have encountered a transition of technology over the course of the past 10 years, and I've been in my role for 11 years, so I've seen every one of these transitions from an EPA perspective. The technology paths for dealing with emissions, whether it was particulate matter in 2007, where every manufacturer in North America deployed diesel particulate filters. So a very singular path, a very singular target, and everyone followed the same model. In 2010, it was selective catalytic reduction. And virtually every manufacturer in the heavy-duty space followed the same path. One manufacturer tried a different path, but they've since come back in, and every manufacturer is now using selective catalytic reduction. Whenever we think about GHG Phase 2, which really goes into effect next year, for the first time it affects trailers. In 2021, it reinstates for tractors and for engines, and then carries through in 2024 and 2027. Each of those are focused on driving fuel economy improvement and a reduction in carbon emissions to the tune of 25% improvement over the performance we're encountering today. Today, we are already operating at around 33% improvement in fuel economy from where we were in 2007. So we've already seen massive improvements. We're already focused on a next major step in fuel economy with regard to diesel powered vehicles. But in this case, it's very, very different. When the EPA developed these rules, instead of it being a singular path, they essentially opened it up into best available commercial technologies. So there's 25 different technologies that are available for fleets and networks to utilize whenever they're working with OEMs and trying to determine how to configure those vehicles to meet those standards, with that focus on reaching 25% improvement in fuel economy. So it's everything from low rolling resistance tires, it is speed limiters, it is the use of much more robust aerodynamic devices, perhaps not as aerodynamic as Louis' innovative haircut, but with that being the case, there's 25 potential technologies that could be utilized, and they're all focused on hitting that target of grams of CO2 per ton mile. Now, why is that important? And why does that have anything to do with technology and where vehicles are moving? The single largest driver of fuel economy benefit under this standard is a small tool called the automated manual transmission. So the vast majority of the Class 8 commercial vehicles in the marketplace today have standard transmissions, traditional 10-speed manual transmission that all the tenured drivers loved to operate until they had experience with an automated manual transmission. We went through this from a behavior management standpoint with many, many of our customers, and drivers fought them tooth and nail for the first 2 weeks. And then after that period, they said, I'll never go back to a standard transmission again. It's dramatically changed the way that they operate the vehicles. It improves fuel economy, it improves safety, but it's the number one building block. And remember, I gave you that timeline, 2021, 2024, 2027. With this being one of the single largest building blocks for fuel economy improvement, most fleets have already begun to pull this forward. we're seeing manufacturers with 80, 90+% penetration of using automated manual transmissions. So again, a major building block for autonomy. You can't have an autonomous vehicle if you don't have an automated manual or automatic transmission. Standard transmissions won't work. So we're seeing a major shift in the marketplace and in the industry already ahead of the regulation. But again, the regulation is starting to define that. So moving on, next level of regulation, the electronic logging device mandate. Now, many of your supply chains and many of your primary partners from a logistics standpoint are already operating fleets that are connected from an hours of service standpoint, but you represent a very, very small degree of the overall transportation network and marketplace. So today, if you think about most of the commercial vehicles that are out there, there are probably 10, 12, 15% of them that have an electronic logging device or an hours of service tracking device, electronic logs. As of December 18th of this year, every fleet operating in interstate transportation must have an electronic logging device installed in that fleet. That's going to significantly have an impact on performance of fleets and visibility to fleets. It improves our access to data around how those fleets are being managed and where goods are in the supply chain, but it's also projected to have probably a 5 to 7% impact on the available capacity, because there's a number of fleets that are out there that when they're running paper logs, they may be stretching their hours of service a little bit, they're running a few more extra miles per week, and frankly, they're operating illegally and they're operating unsafely. So the focus is on how to drive greater visibility and transparency and overall greater utilization, but during that transition time, there's going to be a significant amount of disruption that's projected to occur. So let's talk a little about changing distribution networks. This is also another macro factor. And when you think about what's happening with Amazon and Walmart and their focus on e-commerce and Alibaba beyond the United States, it's dramatically changing the way that we think about the way we operate as consumers. My family is guilty of this. The Amazon Prime delivery van shows up at my house at least 3 days per week, if not 5. And it's because of that simplicity. It's because of that immediate access. It's because when we're sitting on the couch at 10 o'clock at night and think, oh, I meant to pick this up at the store, well, you just go online and it's simple. And that's dramatically changed the way that we think about access to materials and access to goods and how those are delivered to us without much effort on our own. The same type of impact is going to occur when we think about our supply chains and parts distribution networks and how goods are delivered. This doesn't even take into effect the whole dynamic of drone delivery and final mile delivery and robotic deliveries and how those are all going to play out. This is just a reshaping of access to those networks. Now, why is that important? Well, when you think about the retail networks, this is what's happening within those brick and mortar organizations that are out there. And whenever you go down the list, you would probably see, okay, that's not surprising to see Payless shoes. Okay, maybe Payless shoes didn't need to be in existence to begin with, but they're definitely being disrupted here. But whenever you go down the list, you see companies as well like CVS. CVS has been in a growth mode for decades. There's a CVS on virtually every other corner in the United States, but their model is now being disrupted by these shifts in how technology is being utilized and how other players are coming into the marketplace. So it's something to be very, very mindful of, and what are the parallels that may exist to the automotive sector is the question we should be asking. The energy revolution, this is an exciting area. This is where I spend a tremendous amount of time, and we've played a significant role in looking at the deployment of natural gas vehicles within our own lease and rental portfolio and even our own dedicated transportation solutions fleet. But there are so many different options out there. And I'll be the first to tell you, there is no single silver bullet. There is no single answer. There's limitations to each one. There are applications for each one. So beyond the silver bullet, we're probably looking for silver buckshot. And that means that we're going to use multiple different tools. But traditional diesel is definitely going to be challenged. Renewable natural gas is gaining a lot of traction from an emissions standpoint. Synthetic diesel, we have now deployed even within our own network. Hydrogen fuel cell technology, I'll show some pictures of some products, but this is growing with the potential for utilizing hydrogen within the transportation networks. Now, there's significant work that has to be done with regard to hydrogen production and hydrogen distribution, but if you think about a utopia fuel, hydrogen is probably right there at the top of the list. And then electric. Sven talked about electrification in the automotive space. Well, electrification is also occurring in the commercial space. And we're seeing it occur in lighter duty vehicles and medium duty vehicles and in hybrid solutions, but now more than ever because of the advancements that are being made in battery technology and the efficiency that can be gleaned from an electric drive powertrain versus a traditional internal combustion engine powertrain, there's dramatic shifts that are going to be occurring. So an example of that hydrogen fuel cell technology is the Nikola product. Nikola Motors announced that they would be developing an electric drive hydrogen fuel cell technology and unveiled it last December. Just in recent weeks, the Toyota team has now announced that they have a Class 8 commercial vehicle hydrogen fuel cell technology in development and working through a proof of concept there in California as well. Now, the difference here is the traditional manufacturers, and I'll speak to them in a moment, they've always been focused on how to drive advancements within their own networks and how to drive improvements in their traditional powertrains. But Nikola Motors didn't exist 18 months ago. No one had ever heard of it. Toyota, while you guys are very well known in the automotive space in North America, you really don't play a role in the Class 8 space. But now you have an entrant who's saying, we think we have an opportunity to play a role within that segment. And they're not alone. There are others that are now saying that they also want to play in the Class 8 space here in a pure battery electric solution. But Tesla will be unveiling their Class 8 semi-tractor in September, is what's been tweeted by Elon. But those guys have definitely disrupted the market space. And this is not an actual picture. They've not shared what the product's going to look like. This is just someone's assumption of what it could look like. I doubt that it'll have mirrors. It will have a driver's seat and a steering wheel to start. But they have shared that when that vehicle comes off the production line, it will be fully autonomous ready. So that's a next big step with regard to where the technology is moving. And with that being the case, let's talk about the 5 levels of autonomy. And everyone's probably familiar with this. But this could have significant ramifications for us when we think about the commercial vehicle industry and how freight is moved in supply chains. And while I think it will be a long time before we see level 5 fully autonomous vehicles in any sector, there are a number of hurdles that need to be passed from a regulatory standpoint. But there's definitely opportunities for heavy-duty vehicles that operate a significant amount of their time on highway, traveling long distances. They are a prime candidate for automation. So there are definitely strategies that are evolving with regard to utilizing those technologies more in a ramp-to-ramp or depot-to-depot type of mode, where the local delivery or the pedal routes can be manned. The final delivery, or I should say the milk runs to pick up or the pedal routes for final delivery could be manned legs of the run. But if there's a 300-400 mile segment that occurs between those collection points and delivery markets, that could be fully autonomous. And that doesn't mean a driver sitting in the seat ready to take control of the steering wheel. That means a vehicle that is guided onto the entry ramp to the highway through remote control, through drone technology, and then it is put in autonomous mode and it'll run for 300 or 400 miles completely unmanned. And this isn't 10 years off into the future. This is technology that's available today, and there's regulations that are rapidly advancing. And some of those regulations are focused on highway safety, and you think, oh my goodness, how could an unmanned vehicle deliver highway safety? When you think about the factors that create the collisions that occur out there, and the fact that last year, the United States encountered 40,000 traffic fatalities, many of them on highway, very few of them, thank God, were not involving commercial vehicles. But with the miles that are traveled and the way that interstates operate, and the focus on reducing the number of fatalities that are out there, deployment of regulations that allow for the acceleration of adoption of some of these technologies is going to continue to get a lot of support. It's going to continue to gain momentum. Now, there are a number of states who have started taking very aggressive positions on development of those technologies and pulling those technologies through. And here are essentially 13 states. The list has grown since I pulled this slide just a month ago. Ohio very much is in the game, and there are others who are playing a role in developing framework for the use and validation and testing of autonomous vehicles. California was the first about a month ago, probably 6 weeks ago now, who proposed legislation to say that an automaker, an OEM, can now self-certify that a vehicle is 100% capable of operating at level 5, full autonomy, no one behind the wheel whatsoever, potentially no one even in the vehicle. And if they certify to that level, they can begin operating those vehicles in that mode and in that capacity starting next year. Now, there are a lot of hurdles to be cleared to get there, but they're paving the way. And we know that as California goes, so do many of the states that follow their lead. So it'll be very interesting to see how this plays out, but it's moving very, very aggressively and very quickly. I don't want to leave out the traditional manufacturers who play a significant role in driving a lot of the advancements that we've seen from a technology standpoint. They're primary partners of ours. They're great support partners and development partners for ours. An example of this is Freightliner, the Daimler team with their Inspiration product. Now this was deployed or unveiled to the marketplace in May of 2015. That was roughly 6 or 7 months after they unveiled their product in Hanover at the IAA show, their Highway Pilot 2025 autonomous vehicle that they're developing in Europe. So not to be outdone, the team here decided to deploy their own platform. Now what's interesting, and I know there's some of the Daimler team from the automotive side in the room, the picture that's here is the picture that they first shared around their technology. There was a significant amount of backlash from the driver community of, you're developing vehicles to take my job. So there's very few pictures you'll see these days in marketing around a vehicle that doesn't have a driver in it. But the technologies are there to really drive that efficiency, to drive that safety, to drive that potential for automation. And it's being developed not in just the startup organizations, but in many of the traditional organizations as well. One of those examples of a startup organization is Uber with the Auto autonomous product that they've been developing now. Uber's very focused in the automotive space. We're all very familiar, but with their acquisition of Auto, they're very focused on the commercial vehicle space as well. They're most focused on how to retrofit this technology onto the 7 million existing vehicles that are already on the roadway. But first, they're going to perfect their technology in the passenger car space as well. And I think my final slide is just an example, a late entrant into the market in the past few days, and again, a new player who has deep capabilities with, from a technology standpoint is NVIDIA, but PACCAR is a very traditional manufacturer, and we're seeing partnerships develop that will bring automotive or autonomous technologies to bear very, very quickly. So partnerships are being built, new entrants are coming into the marketplace, and the technology is evolving very, very quickly. So thank you for the opportunity to spend a few moments with you, and I'll return to the panel.
Thank you very much, Scott. Thank you very much, Scott. Again, another very interesting presentation that laid out what changes are coming in that will really impact the supply chain and logistics. A couple of things that sprung to mind there was, firstly, I never saw anything there that made me think if you're working in logistics, your life's going to be much easier. Something that I've kind of learned from iPads and iPhones and things is all they seem to do is just make me work harder and longer. And the other thing I learned out from that presentation was that Chief Technology and Procurement Officers can be funny guys. So that was thank you very much, Scott. Yeah. And just one more comment on that. If anyone wants to say any comments about my hair, you have to be a premier sponsor. I think we heard some interesting presentations there. Thank you to GAMA for welcoming us. We heard a lot about how the automotive industry is changing and how the supply chain is changing from the increasing technology. So, which is overall what the whole subject for the conference is about. So now it's your kind of turn. It's a Q&A or comments from you guys. The usual rules apply. Please raise your hand, wait for a microphone, say your name and company name, and then ask a question or make your comment. So we've got a short period of time to do that. So I don't know if anyone wants to kick off. And again, I will also point out something that we said before, that if you think by not asking a question you'll go to coffee earlier, that isn't the case. We have got some questions prepared as well. So, but if anyone does want to kick off, has anyone got a question? First question. Okay, there's at the back there first, please. You know, this is about technology and looking forward, so I don't know why I know a guy like this has got a question, but please.
Standard. You know, for the rear view, the rear cameras on vehicles, it took 10 years to become legalized, or to be required. So 2018 will be the first year. And that's quite a deployment period. But I have no doubt that new technology is going to deploy very quickly, but the one thing no one discussed was the huge amount of lawyers that are located in this country that have to decide liability requirements for autonomous vehicles and the governments that have to put in the infrastructure. Those seem to be two giant bottlenecks that will slow down deployment of new technology. Any thoughts on that?
You know, I think from I'll go to passenger vehicles first. I think, you know, you'll see deployment voluntarily by OEMs, just in terms of driving conquest and also maintaining their market share. So you're going to see from a passenger vehicle adoption, early adoption, even though you're right, 2018 is the first year of, you know, legal backup cameras. A lot of the vehicles already come with them, including, you know, guided parking. So I think that's going to be one of the factors that differentiates, you know, the leaders from the laggards. But you do make a really good point about regulation and lawyers. And I think that's going to be definitely a hurdle, no question about it. And I think that's where the industry itself can be a stronger player in terms of, you know, shaping what that regulation looks like rather than just kind of being on the receiving end.
Maybe an alternative thought to that is an argument of the legal community may actually drive the adoption even sooner from the end buyer, because if you're involved in a collision and you had the opportunity to buy that option or that safety equipment and you elected not to do so, then you probably have more exposure, especially in a commercial vehicle operation. So I think that many fleets are probably going to be challenged with, if I have the opportunity to use one of these advanced technologies that's focused on not only efficiency but also safety, or primarily safety, and something occurs, then am I going to be even more negligent, and the damage is going to be even more punitive. So I think it goes both ways. But you're right, there's a significant amount of discussion right now from the OEMs around, if I'm integrating this technology and taking greater accountability around the autonomy that we enable through some of these technologies, I'm now more in the line of liability and responsibility. So, you know, will that mean there'll be some type of limits around awards or judgments or whatever the case may be? We'll see how that plays out, but that's definitely a big consideration from the OEMs in the commercial space.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, full disclosure, I'm also a lawyer. I'm a good kind of lawyer. I hope I'm a patent lawyer, but I've also done a lot of corporate law. And I would just second what Scott is saying. I think there's going to be a shift in the momentum that occurs. And there's a lot of great minds trying to solve the liability issues. You've got the blocking and tackling of state legislation and things like that. That's going to take a while to sort out. There's a lot of special interests there, even within states. But if the federal government is giving an overarching push for this, the momentum's going to build. The lawyers are going to follow the momentum. The lawyers, not to be say anything inappropriate, but they'll be following the fees. So they'll be shifting their focus on where they think they can do more. And what Scott talked about is how a lawsuit is broad. You're not going to bring a lawsuit for liability unless there's a violation of a duty. And the duty is set by standards. And the standards is going to be state of the art. So if you're not doing state of the art, you're going to be liable or holding yourself out to liability. Other imaginative things, and then I'll stop. There's been some talk about the federal government setting up a safe harbor. And I've been told it's sort of like what the federal government did in maybe the 50s or the 40s when the polio vaccine first came out. They just said, here's a safe harbor. This is where all litigation, all loose lawsuits have to find their recourse for some period of time. That hasn't gotten traction yet, but things like that are being discussed.
I think the other thing, when you look at level 5 autonomy is, ethical issues. If you have passengers in the car and you have pedestrians who decide to jaywalk, who do you protect, right? And who makes that choice? So I think there are some issues that have to get resolved, but, you can have various stages of autonomy, like Scott mentioned, level 1 to level 5. So I think there's definitely going to be an adoption of, if not all the way to level 5, but significant ease on the strain on the driver and overall safety. That's definitely a big driver.
Okay, thank you. Question at the front here first, please.
Hi, morning. Christopher Ludwig, Automotive Logistics. You'll unfortunately be hearing a lot from me today as well. Quick question for Scott. You described the Silicon Valley a little bit like sharpening their knives on the sidelines, ready to cut this market apart a little bit. How do you kind of see that going forward for Ryder, for example? Will your strategy be to out-innovate them to stay ahead? Will it be to buy them? Will it be to collaborate with them to bring some of their innovations into your company? And do you see a risk of sort of obsolescence for some companies?
Well, to answer the last question first, there's absolutely rapid advancements occurring. There are a significant number of new entrants into the market. They will not all survive. They will all not be able to develop technologies that are viable. But we're absolutely having to look at new players and new technologies and think about how those can be leveraged as products and solutions and services for our customers. Many of our customers look to us to be that validation, the research and development arm for them. We've tried a lot of products over the years from the traditional OEMs as well that haven't worked out very well. But it's just part of the normal course of business. So, we have definitely expanded our focus in looking at what technologies are available, what energy sources are being utilized, and how those can be turned into products and services and drive value for our customer base. So the answer is absolutely. We're spending a lot of time there with those manufacturers. Many of them are coming to us and saying, you have the perfect portfolio because we have virtually every duty cycle and every known make and model of vehicle under the sun in our fleet. So our ability to work with them, with specific customers. We have a lot of customers that are very interested in playing that role as well because they want to be a lead in their industry segment for adopting those technologies, and we can help broker those types of relationships. So that's very much a very active piece of how we're looking at the marketplace.
Okay. Any more questions? Yeah.
Bruce Arlinghouse. I'd like to follow up on something that Mike mentioned in his question about infrastructure. All the presentations I don't want to say take for granted, but assume a certain level of investment in improvements and changes in the transportation infrastructure in the United States. Where's that money going to come from? And does anybody have any of you seen an estimate of just what we're talking about? Is it the Everett Dirksen, $1 billion here, $1 billion there, and pretty soon you're talking about real money? Or is it $1 trillion here and $1 trillion there? And where is that funding going to come from? And then the other side of the coin is that 25-year transition period and the cultural acceptance, not just of drivers, but consumers, and their feeling of security on the road with all these robots. People don't want to fly on airplanes that don't have pilots, at least not yet. I guess we haven't reached the point where a robot will take you off the United flight if you're bumped, but, so a two-part.
Yeah, if I could take a stab at, and I'm going to pile onto your question, I don't have an answer. But about 2.5, 3 years ago, I was at an automotive show in Detroit, and I hopped in a vehicle that was going to be, fully autonomous or close to fully autonomous. And the driver took his hands off the wheel. We were going up an interstate in Detroit to do a demo. And the way they were tracking the lanes was not white lane markers, but a contrast between the pavement and a lane marker, or the pavement and something else in the lane. Well, it just so happened that a tar truck, a tar laying, hot tar truck, had preceded them by about a half hour and was laying down tar beads between the concrete and had gone off the side exit ramp. Well, our vehicle then followed that black tar line straight up. So not an answer to your question, but infrastructure is a tremendously large question here. And that's going to affect each state differently. And the tax money to do all that it's a big unanswered question.
So I'll take a stab at answering it a little differently, because I think there's different responses depending upon, are we talking about electrification and the infrastructure required for charging and power and energy management? There's so much happening in that space with distributed energy and how we're going to be managing the grid. I think that's a completely different discussion. But when you think about autonomy, there may be a bit of a misperception around autonomy requiring sensors in the roadways and along guardrails, and I don't think that's quite going to be the reality. The embedded technology in the vehicles themselves, and right now, much of the autonomy is focused on the individual vehicle being able to surmise its surroundings and make adjustments and approximations around how it needs to interact with infrastructure and other vehicles. Very soon, you'll see greater and greater vehicle-to-vehicle connectivity. You'll see that in the automotive, the passenger car space, probably more quickly than you see it in the commercial space. But today it's very much an individual capability, and the technologies are evolving very quickly with regard to the ability to assess the surroundings, make a decision, and react even much more quickly than a human being could. So that's what's driving a lot of the safety benefits. But when you move to vehicle-to-vehicle connectivity, then you go to a network effect. Then you're capturing real-time information around traffic flows and obstacles in the roadway and changes in infrastructure, and sharing it across a much broader universe. And that's a completely different ballgame. But from an infrastructure standpoint, we need a significant investment in infrastructure, period. Has nothing to do with electrification or autonomy. But with that being the case, I don't know that there's significant investment that's required from a sensor standpoint to interact with the vehicles. It's just a basic upkeep of the roadways as they exist today.
But in addition to what Scott said, there are countries that are doing experiments right now. For example, Japan has made a very significant investment in terms of communicating the infrastructure that communicates to the car. So I think it's still in somewhat of an early stage. I think there's probably some work to be done around those experiments and proving them out and defining what that standard is. And, I think the other part of the challenge is going to be, how do you come up with a common standard for all the manufacturers, right, that are going to operate in the car? You have commercial vehicles, you have motorcycles, you have passenger vehicles, right? So they all need to be on the shared standard so they can all communicate to the infrastructure, and the vehicle-to-vehicle communication can be effective. If they're talking different languages, it's going to be challenging. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done to define what those common standards are and how the communication occurs. I think it's going to get there. In the US, for example, we have STAR standards, which communicate with the dealers and the OEM. That's a common standard. But that took a while to develop. So I think the vehicle-to-vehicle and vehicle-to-infrastructure is going to come. It's just going to be some, trial and error there.
Okay. Question at the back there, please.
Hi, I'm Ricardo Leite with Cloudleaf, and I am from Silicon Valley, probably the only one wearing jeans here. So following up on your comments about Silicon Valley technologies, you talk about a lot about liabilities and wanted to know what is important for the logistics and the automotive industry. Is it predictive analytic, machine learning, real-time reporting, tracking? What is it that the adoption rate for this industry? How do you see it?
Yes.
So all of the above.
All of the above.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, before we finish off, just a couple of things for later on today. We've got the giveaway from Venture, so please complete the form and be part of that. They've got some great prizes, including iPads, I think, and that'll be at the end of the next session, so you need to complete your form before then, and then at the end of the session there'll be the drone presentation. After lunch is the think tanks. After that session on kind of the manufacturing of the future, then from there on to the gala dinner, and from the Ryder hosted gala dinner, and then from the dinner we'll be going back to an afterglow party as well. An afterglow networking event, I'll call it, just in case any of my family are watching this on the live streaming. It isn't a party, it's a business networking event with quite a bit of music, a few drinks, just in case if we've talked a lot and your throat needs refreshing. And then a great day ahead for tomorrow. But I'd like to, perhaps before we go, just one more red and green card thing. We can talk about some of the technologies that are happening. But I wondered who actually wants to drive, not drive, an autonomous car? How much of us are drivers and like the experience of driving, and who wants an autonomous car? So green if you want an autonomous car, and red if you don't want one. Okay. It's more green, but there's enough red out there. And interestingly enough, it wasn't necessarily an age thing either, because that might have been a factor, although I guess we're not the youngest group in the world. But thank you very much to the panel for a very interesting start, really highlighted exactly what we wanted to highlight. The technologies that are coming through, how they're going to impact our lives, how they're going to impact automotive, and how they're going to impact the supply chain. So thank you very much to our first panel. Thank you, gentlemen. And join us for the coffee outside. Please visit the sponsor stands, and the coffee, I think, is on the right-hand side. Thank you.